Hello, everyone, and welcome to Uncivil Law, and I hope you're having a great day. For today's stream, I'm going to react to James Sexton reacting to some of his haters, because I was watching this and I was finding what he said to not be particularly fair, and so I thought I could assess his assessment and maybe make some comments. So for those of you who might not know, James Sexton is a divorce attorney in New York, and he has been going a bit viral on social media. I like what he has to say. I found him to be interesting, but in this particular response video, I find his response to perhaps not be what we would hope for. I find it to be a bit problematic in some ways. So I'm going to assess the assessor and critique the critiquer and see how it goes. So, all right, James, get us started on this thing.
Welcome back to Cross-Examination. I'm your host, James Sexton.
Hi,
this
James.
one is for the haters.
Okay.
All right, look, I'll be honest with you. I have tried, when people try to sort of clout chase or ride my coattails or comment on my things, I just see it as like, hey, that's a great compliment. You know, your haters are your motivators, all that kind of stuff. But every once in a while, the yippy dog in my ear eventually needs to get put down. So this is a situation that has happened a little more often recently with my growing
I guess James is a part-time veterinarian, at least for the dogs in his mind, and puts them down sometimes. Noted.
Popularity. So now it's time to clap back just a little bit. Again, all in good fun, no hate in my heart, not trying to dox anybody. Please, my fans, do not cause any harm to these people. I wish them all of the best. I think it's the internet. Everybody's got a right to their opinion.
Okay.
And I love everybody being able to express themselves.
I bet you do.
You fuck around, you got to find out.
Okay.
And now it's time to have this conversation. And today we start with a gentleman named as the Speech Prof. I had never heard of the Speech Prof, but 1 million followers have. I don't know how many are Russian bots, but God bless the guy. So
right away, we're just doing some attacking on the man, right? Rather than attacking on the argument. He's got 1 million followers, but who knows how many of them are Russian bots? And we're just trying to undermine the guy. Okay, fair enough, I guess.
Apparently, his name is Professor Chesko. I looked him up. He is a teacher, a professor at a community college in Los Angeles. He has a bachelor's degree in something and a master's degree from Arizona State University. I'm not sure if he did the online edition or the actual in-person edition, but whichever it is, got a master's degree in communication. Cool thing is, we have that in common. Before I went to law school, I got my master's degree at New York University, the in-person edition, actually in Greenwich Village, as opposed to.
So assuming that he didn't get his in person, but you did, does that mean that yours is better or more worthy? What is there seems to be an implication or a diss there, again, against the quality of his education as opposed to the quality of his argument. All right.
To anything online, and was working on my PhD before I decided to go to law school, but he introduces himself as a professor of argumentation. Not a phrase I've ever heard before. I am not a professor of argumentation, although I did teach classes in communications at New York University for a number of years while I was in law school. So we both got that in common. I'd never heard of argumentation, but apparently, as someone who's been arguing for a living for 25 years, I feel like we can probably go toe-to-toe at a minimum on some of this stuff.
Okay.
But the speech professor has lots and lots to say. From what I can see, much of it is pandering, which is partly why he's so popular. He's basically getting online and going, men stink. But let's look at what he had to say, because again, I don't want to just engage in, what's it called again? I'm not a professor of argumentation, ad hominem attacks. I
don't know, James, with all due respect, I feel like there's been a fair number of ad hominem attacks at this point, belittling him based on, maybe he got an online education, belittling him based on the fact that maybe he's making appeals to particular demographics, belittling him based on, I've never heard of a professor of argumentation. So you've done pretty good on the ad hom so far, James, but maybe it will get better.
I'm going to engage in ad hominem attacks. I wouldn't do that. I'm above
I don't know,
Let's get down.
I don't know. It feels like you maybe aren't completely above it, to be honest, but all right.
To the meat and potatoes of his argument, because as a professor, I know that he's going to be focused on the facts. Let's go after it. Let's
see.
If you marry, there's about a 56% chance that your marriage will end in divorce.
No, there isn't. And he knows that. He's just expecting you to not fact check him because you.
No, he does know that. And I'm fine with you fact checking me. See, I'm a lawyer. So in court, you have to use citations and you have to be prepared to back up things with evidence and testimony. That's how it works. I think they talk about an argument.
Great, James. Then why don't you do that right now? Right? If he's saying your source is bad, why don't you just simply cite your source? Like right now. It's like, no, here is my source. Here is where I got that number from. If you need to be prepared to back it up, why don't you just simply back it up as opposed to being like, well, as a lawyer, I have to back things up. Okay, then maybe you should do that. Like right now, that might be good.
School. But I am fine with you fact checking me and you simply saying he's expecting you not to fact check him. I'm sorry, have we met? Do you know what my motivations are? I would love anyone to fact check me, including you, so we can have an intelligent debate and discussion about this. Continue.
Okay.
You've heard so many other people repeat it over the years. It originally came from stats in the 1970s, dividing divorces in a year by marriages in the same year.
Pause.
Which is
Actually, the divorce statistics that are out there come from a variety of sources, all of which have their own flaws, but
none of which I'm going to actually cite right now. I'm just going to say there are studies that exist that back me, but I'm not going to tell you what they are. Okay.
automatically assuming that my number came from a 1970s study where I've never mentioned that study in any of my public work or the book that I've written. That seems kind of arbitrary, but let's go on and see if your argumentation gets any better.
The actual divorce rate has been declining for 40 years. And if you want to understand why it was even that high in the first place, no-fault divorce laws in the 70s and 80s meant women could finally leave marriages without proving abuse or adultery in court.
Wow, you are so wrong.
Is he though?
It's kind of not even funny, or maybe even a little bit funny. So, yes, there has been a decline in the overall total divorce rate since the 1980s, and I am happy to get into that in just a minute in terms of the statistics. But to suggest that it's a function of no-fault divorce coming in the 1970s is absolutely preposterous.
Wait,
Many states, including New York, didn't adopt no-fault divorce until well after 2000. So
yeah, so you remember earlier how you said that you wanted people to fact check you, James? Yeah, I fact checked you on that claim. No, you're just wrong. No-fault divorce started 1969 in California. The last holdout other than New York was North Carolina in 1985. Then New York added no-fault divorce in 2010. So they were by far and away the laggard. They were the last state to do it. But no, a lot of states didn't do it in the 2000s. Only New York. By 1985, every other state had done no-fault divorce. So when the guy claimed it was due to no-fault divorce laws being done in the 70s and 80s, yeah, that's when no-fault divorce laws were passed in the 70s and 80s, with the sole exception of New York. I fact-checked you. Not so much.
So that makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, and you're about 30 years early in that analysis.
No, he's not.
Continue.
Access to education.
No, he's right. He's right on point. He's exactly correct. Yeah.
And financial independence meant they no longer had to stay in bad marriages just to survive.
Pause. You know, this is so demonstrably false, and yet seems so much like you might be pandering to your audience a little bit, being like, you know what it is.
You know what, James? If it's demonstrably false, you know what you could do? Demonstrate it. Remember earlier how you said that as a lawyer, you need to be able to present sources and back up your claims? If it's demonstrably false, why not demonstrate it? Show us how it's done instead of making vague arguments. You have to demonstrate things, but I'm not going to. Okay.
Girl bosses, that's what it is. Actually, it's not, but we'll get into that in just a minute.
Of course.
Why don't we get into it now? What do you think it is? He's posited an explanation. He's posited a theory, what he thinks it is. Would you like to posit a counter theory? No? Okay, I guess we'll get to it later. We'll see how it goes.
There was a spike of people escaping. He's using that spike as his baseline, and he's doing it confidently, knowing he won't be fact-checked.
Absolutely not. Happy to be fact-checked.
Are you?
About to make you feel kind of silly.
All right.
Continue.
Consider failure staying together miserable for the children or staying together for financial, economic reasons. And then we add that to the 56% that end in divorce. It's another 20% probably.
Probably is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. He said probably, like my 5-year-old when I ask her who drew on the wall, and she says probably the cat. But we don't have a cat. He took an already debunked statistic, added 20% that he pulled from absolutely nowhere, and presented it as analysis.
Pause. Yeah, your metaphor doesn't really work. So, although it does cause me to maybe question your parenting. Okay.
Remember when he said he wasn't going to do ad hominem earlier? Yeah, I remember when he said he wasn't going to do ad hominem earlier. Now we're just throwing parenting into the mix. You must be a bad parent. I remember when he said he wasn't going to do ad hominem. I remember that. Pepperidge Farm remembers.
So, no, my statistic didn't come from nowhere, and we'll get into that in just a second.
How about now? Why don't you just tell us where it came from now? No, you're not going to do that? Okay.
And my analysis of the overall marriage dissatisfaction rate also didn't come from nowhere. But again,
Where did it come from, James? You said that you had to be ready in court to provide sources. Why don't you just pop a source thing on the bottom and be like, source? You know, just pop it on screen and then we can see. No? Okay.
you probably made that assumption because you didn't look into any of the statistics, apparently. You just saw one from the 1970s and you went, oops, that's the one. That must be the only one that exists, and Jim must have made the rest of it up. I don't know. I mean, you seriously, this guy teaches people how to argue? Let's keep going.
Well, yeah, I mean, but you haven't done what you said that you were going to do. You said, I'm a lawyer and I have to be ready for sources and present things. And you haven't done that yet. Okay.
Look, I've literally made hundreds of videos about the invisible labor that wives and mothers go to when their husbands treat them like surrogate mommies.
Oh, really, man? Come on. Like, this is the worst kind of pandering right now. Like, this has nothing even to do with the statistics we're talking about or the argument we're talking about.
Neither does that comment. Neither does that comment. It also has nothing to do with the statistic. You are just taking something you find to be problematic and exposing it to make an argument from incredulousness, right? That you're like, can you believe this guy says these things? How horrible are these things? Because these things are horrible. Surely the other things he says have no value. So that sounds fallacious to me, right? And the appeal to incredulity. Okay, yeah, no, carry on.
This is just you, like, legit going like, ladies, please like and subscribe. Like, this has nothing to do with your argument, the invisible labor that women go through. What does that have to do with the baseline divorce statistics and the marriage satisfaction rate?
Well, assuming the premise, then that might be a reason why people get divorced. You know, if you think that because of invisible labor, women are dissatisfied, therefore they're getting divorced. If that's a premise, then it might be a partial explanation for why people are getting divorced. If you buy the premise, I don't know what you think it's due to because you haven't presented any argument of any kind. You're just saying this guy's arguments are dumb, but haven't provided a counter. All right.
Right. None whatsoever. Is this something I didn't learn because I didn't study argumentation? Because I feel like one of the things you would teach if you taught a class in argumentation would be things like when you're trying to explain a specific logical argument and the statistics that underlie it, don't completely change topics and talk about topics that your audience would probably find interesting. Like, by the way, the divorce rate is such, and that's a lovely hat you're wearing, sir.
Well, first of all, he's free to talk about anything he wants. And second of all, to the extent that it's irrelevant to the argument, then you can also ignore it, right? If you think that this topic is just a complete switch of topics, then you can just ignore it because it has nothing to do with the topic in hand. But you're mentioning it. Why? Appeal to incredulity. Okay.
Continue.
Throw out made-up numbers to make a point. That's not how argumentation works.
It actually feels like that's how your argumentation works, because you've just randomly assigned statistics to my argument that I didn't cite. But continue.
I'm sure you're going to cite the real statistics anytime now. Anytime you're going to cite them would be great. He thinks that your numbers came from the 1970s. He thinks that's where the numbers came from, and he has a chart to argue why that he thinks that is true. So he has a basis to make the argument, right? Well, here's a chart that shows these things. So that might be where he got his numbers from. And you're all over here like, that's not where I got my numbers from. Great. Where'd you get your numbers from, James? Anytime would be fine.
Got something that fails 75% of the time. That's a negligent activity.
So let's talk about a real statistic, since he won't. College-educated women who marry after 25 divorce around 25% of the time, the lowest rate of any demographic.
Okay, he's not necessarily citing where he's getting that number from, but he's citing a fact. So he's actually like arguing, here is a factual claim. James has yet to make a factual claim, but okay, at least he's making a factual claim.
And the reason that 25% number exists, the reason that divorce rates in general keep dropping, is because when women have education, financial independence, and the freedom to actually choose their partner instead of settling out of necessity, they build stronger marriages.
Oh, this is like a deeply offensive argument, my friend. And not only...
Right? Oh, it's an offensive argument. Yeah, it's just offensive. Why? Why is it offensive? It is a potentially plausible explanation. Maybe it's true. Maybe women who are better educated and have more resources are not making marriage decisions because they need the financial support. Maybe women in the past were making marriage decisions partially out of necessity because they need to find someone who could help sustain them. And maybe that is less the case now. Maybe women don't need to do that as much. And so the people they choose to marry, they're marrying for reasons other than that. And so they can be more discriminating in their choices. I mean, that sounds potentially plausible. Now, perhaps you can present some evidence of why he's full of shit. Perhaps you have some evidence that his argument is full of crap. But just to say, oh, it's deeply offensive, why? Why is it deeply offensive? And why is it not true? Would you like to present some evidence to that at any time? No? Okay.
Not only is it demonstrably false, it's incredible.
If it's demonstrably false, demonstrate it. Just demonstrate. If it's demonstrably false, this should be super easy for you. Super easy, no problem, right? It's demonstrably false. All you have to do at this point is put text on the screen that says source and then cite your source. You know, you don't even have to say it orally. Just put it on screen, then we can go look it up. But no, we're not going to do that. It's demonstrably false, but I'm not going to demonstrate it. I'm just going to say it.
Incredibly classist, but we'll get into that in just
because it's classist doesn't mean it's not true. Class is a thing that exists that might have some, I mean, I think it's probably true. And I would be willing to bet that you would agree with me, James, that one of the principal reasons people get divorced has to do with money. I would imagine that money is a significant, even major contributing factor to a lot of divorces. So class may have something to do with it. It might be true. Moving on.
a second.
It doesn't say marriage is a negligent activity. The data says
maybe stick with argumentation and not trying to define legal terms like negligence.
Okay.
Negligence is defined as any activity that essentially fails to perceive a substantial and unjustifiable risk of harm. That's the definition of the term if you picked up a copy of Black's Law Dictionary.
No, it's not. No, it's not the definition of negligence, James. No, it's not. Negligence has 4 factors. Do you want to tell them what it is? No? Okay, that's all right. I'll tell them. Duty, breach of duty, causation, and damages are the 4 factors of negligence. 1, duty. I have an obligation to you. 2, I breached my obligation to you. 3, the breach of my obligation caused damage. 4, there were in fact damages. That's what negligence is, James. So, there's that. Okay, moving on.
So it in fact does, because anything where there is a greater probability of harm than 50% is a negligent activity. Technically.
No, it's not, James. It has nothing to do with that. No, just because the probability, that's completely wrong. Yeah, the probability of harm is greater than 50%, therefore negligence suddenly applies. I don't think so. I think that the negligence applies if the probability of harm is significantly less than 50%. If there is any real probability of harm, then you kind of have the duty to do so. To point to a trivial example, let's suppose that you're driving and instead of looking at the road, you are looking at your phone. You're playing with your phone and maybe texting it or doing some light browsing or maybe watching a movie on your phone. Okay, what is the probability of you getting into a vehicle accident? I don't know. I haven't done the studies, but I don't think it's necessarily greater than 50%. There are a lot of people who do this on their phones, but it's not half the time that there's an accident. So whatever the probability is, it's much less than 50%. Does that mean that it's not negligent? Fuck no. It doesn't mean that. You have a duty to operate your car in a reasonably careful manner. You weren't doing that because you're, looking at the phone and watching a movie or whatever the bullshit is that you were doing, right? And what's the probability of that accident happening? I don't know. But if the accident does happen, you're going to have a problem. So no, it's not a 50% thing. That's definitely not how that works.
There's what's called the BPL analysis. Look it up, which is the burden of not doing something against the probability of harm occurring and the severity of the harm. So if you were to think about it, the likelihood of divorce, okay, and the likelihood of harm caused by divorce against the foregone benefit if you don't marry, under almost any analysis, that would fit the definition of negligence. It might even fit the legal definition of recklessness.
No, it wouldn't, James. It wouldn't fit the definition of negligence because my question would be, who is your duty to? Right? I mean, in this scenario, let's assume that your numbers are correct. And that divorce, there's a 56% probability of divorce. Let's just assume that to be true for the sake of this argument. And let's also assume your number of a 20% chance that you won't get divorced, but you're just going to have a bad marriage in which everyone's miserable. So let's assume that there's a 76% rate of failure. That's your number. Okay, that's pretty bad. But in order for there to be negligence, there has to be a duty. My question is, who is your duty to? Who is the duty to? I don't know. Your spouse, but this is information that they would be aware of, presumably, or the information that would be readily available to them. A reasonably prudent person would know that divorce is a thing. They might not know how much of a thing, but they should know it's a thing. So if you assume the risk, then you're not liable under standard negligence theory. Right? That's a bar to a negligence claim, assumption of risk. So if the other person, being an adult, chooses to get married with this background information of which a reasonably prudent person would be aware, then there's no harm under negligence. So who is my duty to that I am breaching? I don't know. So how can there be negligence? I don't know. And recklessness, if there's not negligence, it's pretty hard for there to be recklessness, since recklessness involves a gross negligence, essentially, involves basically a wanton disregard of a known and perceivable risk. But again, what are we trying to claim? That marriages are inherently reckless? I don't know. This doesn't really make sense. I'm not quite sure what we're doing over here. Moving on.
Which is a conscious disregard for a substantial and unjustifiable risk of serious harm. But again, these are the kinds of things they teach you in law school, not in argumentation school online. Go ahead.
They didn't teach me any of these things in law school, James. I don't know if I went to the wrong law school. I don't know what you're talking about, but okay.
because people are more prepared for it, and women aren't being forced into marriage in their early 20s because of outdated notions of a ticking biological clock.
I'm sorry, are you arguing with biology now? The outdated notions of a biological clock. At argumentation school, did they actually cover OBGYN subjects? Because I feel like this is a very broad-based education that you got. I might sign up for Arizona State University. I didn't know.
Well, more of the point, James, you would be equally disqualified to comment on this subject. Because if you're going to appeal to credentials, did argumentation cover OBGYN? Did any of your education cover that, James? Did you, as part of your law degree or your master's degree in communication, did you get a lot of training on OBGYN stuff? So if he's unqualified to comment on it, guess who else is unqualified? That would be you. You're equally unqualified. So you're mocking his lack of credentials, even though you also lack the credentials. Okay, moving on.
No online courses could teach you so much about so many things, but the outdated concept, it feels like what you might be doing here probably is talking about something you know absolutely nothing about.
To the extent that's true of him, it would be equally true of you, James, because in the same exact way that his education didn't do a lot of OBGYN, your education didn't do a lot of OBGYN. So you were equally unqualified. How's that working out for you? Is it working out great? Great. Moving on.
Which would perhaps be the biology behind female reproduction, because to say that it's been discredited in some fashion, that there is such a concept as a biological clock. Do you know any 80-year-olds having babies? No.
Well, that's a very funny thing to say, James, because I'll just say the words fertile octogenarian, and the lawyers immediately know what we're talking about. So, suck on that, James.
Why? Because there's a thing, what's it called? Menopause, right? And that occurs at a certain range of ages, right? So there is, in fact, a biological clock. The question of where should that be defined is something, but again, you're not being so specific on that. It's interesting because you're trying to hold me to a level of specificity and then completely letting yourself run roughshod without any regard for specificity.
Where's your specificity, James? You said that you were going to bring facts into this and sources and stuff. You just seem to be doing a lot of mocking. Can you believe this asshole? He's just saying shit. Moving on.
Interesting dichotomy. Continue.
Women with education and autonomy are building the most successful marriages we've ever seen doesn't make for a very scary soundbite.
But boy, it makes for a pandering one to say what you're saying right now.
Why is it necessarily pandering? Is he wrong? I don't know. I'm not an expert in this area of law. I have very deliberately not studied family law because it makes me sad. Family law is not my thing. But is he wrong? What is the divorce rate when it comes to education? My vague understanding is that more educated people do divorce at a lesser rate. So there seems to be some validity to his claim, but if you think that's not true, perhaps you could at any time present a source or statistic or a number, or anything, instead of just appealing to incredulity. Any time would be fine.
Doesn't it? Unfortunately, what you're saying is wildly inaccurate.
Is it though?
Now, look,
Why?
I usually don't work from a script, but sometimes when you have to get through very specific statistics, you need your visual aids. So I apologize for having had some notes, but I'm going to refer to them from time to time. So,
Okay, great. Maybe he's about to bring studies and statistics into this. Okay, now having spent all this time just mocking and deriding the guy, I guess I'm going to try to bring some numbers. All right, let's do this thing.
50% of marriages ends in divorce. Let's talk about what that means. The most widely cited figure is that roughly 40 to 50% of marriages in the United States end in divorce. That's been cited by the American Psychological.
Well, that sounds like a lot less than the 56% you claimed. I like how we're just doing this and trying to not notice I paid attention, because you said 56%. I watched you say it. I remember you saying that. And now you're saying, oh, wait, And then you said 50%. Anyone notice how he did that? How he said 50% when he originally claimed 56? How he tried to slip it to 50? And now it's getting even worse. The most credible statistic says somewhere between 40 to 50. And the numbers are getting worse with every passing moment. I noticed. Moving on.
Association and remains one of the most impactful ways to frame divorce prevalence. Now, that rate has been declining somewhat in recent decades, but the cumulative lifetime probability of a marriage ending in a divorce remains substantial, around 42 to 45%, and that's the most.
Wait a second. So according to you, this is just great. This is fantastic. According to you, what you have yourself described as the most credible study, right? I'm not putting words in your mouth. You said that. You said this is the most credible, reliable. This is the best study, bestest study ever. Bestest study ever says 42 to 45%. That's a shit ton less than 56%. 42 to 45 versus 56. That's a pretty healthy margin of error. But don't worry, you were only off by a 20% relative margin, right? Because 56 is about 25% higher than 45. So you were only off by a 25% relative margin, but it's okay. No worries, lol.
Most recent statistics as of early 2020. The CDC's National Vital Statistics System reported a crude divorce rate of 2.5 per 1,000 in the population in recent years. Now, that might seem low in isolation, but you can contextualize it. And that translates to hundreds of thousands per divorces per year, about 600.
Well, yes, it would by necessity, because there are more than 1,000 people in the US, James. But 2.5 per 1,000. So 3 out of 1,000. So 0.3 out of 100. So 99.7% success. Okay. Yeah, the numbers are getting worse. All right, moving on.
130,000 to 750,000 divorces annually in the United States. Now, here's where the statistic gets skewed. So 50% is not the number for first marriages. 40 to 50% of first marriages end in divorce. 60 to 70% of second marriages end in divorce. And 73 to 74% of third marriages end in divorce. So the escalating pattern is what skews the average up. And when I talk about 56% of marriages ending in divorce, I'm very open about the fact that I am talking about total marriages using the CDC statistics and the American Psychological Association statistics. The average length of duration of a marriage lasts about 8 years, the median around 7 years prior to divorce. That's from the US Census Bureau American Community Survey data. Couples who marry, you'll note, by the way, when he talks about women over the age of 25, the reason he did that was to hide that my statistic is more correct than he'd like to admit, because couples who marry before the age of 25 have a significantly higher divorce rate, roughly 60% by most estimates. So couples.
But that sort of goes to his premise that more educated women divorce less often because more educated women would tend to be older. So, all right.
Who marry before the age of 25. So when he says, oh, well, women who marry after the age of 20.
Wait a second. Wait. Couples where one or both persons did not complete college degree are at higher risk than college-educated couples. Wasn't that his point? Wasn't that exactly what he was saying? So your own statistics now back him up. Because he said that more educated women divorce less, and your own statistics say that's true. Couples where one or both parties did not complete a divorce rate, so at least one of them didn't complete college. Well, what's the alternative? If at least one of them didn't complete college, what's the alternative? The alternative would be both of them completed college. So couples where both complete college divorce less than where that's not true. So more educated women divorce less. Yeah, because that would be required, right? You'd have to have the woman be college educated for them both to be college educated. So You know, that, yeah, I mean, that sounds about right. Okay, moving on.
So couples who marry before the age of 25. So when he says, oh, well, women who marry after the age of 25 and are college educated, boy, buddy, you're picking a very specific sample size there, which is not something you do unless you're trying to mislead.
No, he was trying to say that college educated women and women who have more options will divorce less. And your counter to that is, did you consider the non-college educated women? Yes, he did. He did consider that. He said that the more college educated women would be better. So what are we doing? Okay, moving on.
He's also having a very classist argument here because the statistics clearly show that couples where one or both partners did not complete college divorced at higher rates than college educated couples.
Right, that was his point. That's what he was saying. Yes.
So you'll notice when he says, oh, well, women over the age of 25 who've completed college, okay, you're deliberately making your sample size much, much smaller in a way that favors what it is you're trying to argue for.
Well, I suppose so, but that's exactly what he's trying to argue. That is his argument. Why are we talking about? His argument is apparently, I mean, I watched it. His argument is exactly that more educated women divorce less. And your counter to that is he's skewing the statistics by looking at people who are college educated. But that's his argument. So that's what that's exactly what he's trying to do. If they're not educated, they divorce more often. If they are educated, they divorce less often. Did you know that he biased his statistics to look at education? Yeah, I'm sure he did. That was his point. Okay.
As opposed to having a good faith, honest analysis of the percentages that I presented. So yes, if you talk only about people over 25 and you talk only about people where one or both parties are college educated, you're absolutely correct. The divorce rate goes lower in that very specific demographic.
That was his argument. That was what he was trying to say. So you're responding to his critic. So you're responding to your critics by agreeing with his thesis. Excellent. Moving on.
By the way, a statistic he likes to ignore in this conversation is gray divorce. Gray divorce, meaning people over the age of 50 who divorce, has roughly doubled since the 1990s. Let that sink in. It's roughly doubled. And that was proven by research by Bowling Green State University, Center for Family and Marriage.
How's that relevant to his argument, though? His argument was based on college education and the ability to provide for themselves and no longer needing to marry for money. And I think we can agree that college education people tend to have higher salaries than those who are not. It's not necessarily true in every case, but more educated people tend to bring in more salaries. So they're more educated, can bring more resources. They're less likely to marry because they need the resources. They're less likely to get divorced. So his statistics back that up. And okay, and he didn't say anything about age, or he didn't say anything about people over 50, and also that doesn't contradict his argument. I mean, I can't speak to the education level of people over 50, but your own statistics said that if they're college educated, they're less likely to get divorced. So one would presume, therefore, without more, that would be equally true in older people. If it's not true, then, fair enough. But you haven't presented any evidence to the contrary. You simply know that the divorce rate for people who are over 50 is going up. But you haven't said anything relating to college education or resources. So I don't know.
Research, Susan Brown was the researcher who covered that it has essentially doubled since the 1990s. So let's take a look at what he just said there. The divorce rate has been declining since about 1970, 1980.
Yeah.
Okay, this decline is largely a statistical artifact that was driven by the fact that fewer people are getting married in the first place.
What the fuck? So his argument is the divorce rate is going down. And you say, that's true, but people are getting married less often. But the divorce rate is going down. Maybe people are being more choosy about who they marry. So people get married less often or whatever, but he was right. The divorce rate is going down. So, okay. I mean, it's a statistical artifact based on the fact that people don't get married as much. Well, people do have to get married in order to get divorced, I'm pretty sure. So, all right, moving on.
See, marriage rates have dropped precipitously from about 10.6 per 1,000 in the population in 1972 to around 6 in recent years. So if fewer people marry, fewer people get divorced. That's just...
Well, not necessarily. You could have more people get divorced even if the marriage rate goes down, if the divorce rate goes up. I mean, that's at least hypothetically possible. So you could have, it's not necessarily true, right? If fewer people get married, but the divorce rate goes up faster than the drop of marriage rate, right? Then more people would get, then even more the absolute number of divorces would increase in such a scenario, right? So, if the divorce rate goes up enough to compensate for the drop of divorce, you could have fewer people getting married and an absolute number of people getting divorced go up still. So it's possible. So it's not necessarily true. But in this situation, fewer people getting divorced. So that was his point. Okay.
Just how that works. But that also doesn't mean marriages are more stable. It means
it does.
The pool has changed of who's getting married and therefore who's getting divorced.
It absolutely means that marriages are more stable. If the divorce rate goes down, it means the marriages that do occur are more stable. That's absolutely what that means. Yeah.
Because marriage is a condition precedent to getting divorced.
It certainly is.
Now, additionally, you can point out that the refined divorce rate, which is divorces per 1,000 married women, has declined less dramatically than the crude divorce rate. Then that decline is concentrated among who? Younger, college-educated couples, which leads to our next undeniable reality. Now, his use of a college-educated woman over the age of 25 is intentional, and don't let him tell you otherwise. Again, for someone who's...
Well, that's kind of his argument. That's what he was trying to argue. So, yes, it was intentional. That's true.
Trying to teach argumentation, unless you're trying to teach how to lie using principles of argumentation, this kind of isn't a good faith conversation, Professor. So college-educated couples who marry after 25 only divorce about 25 to 30% of the time. That's a statistic you're going to hear.
Wow, that sounds pretty good. Because you said earlier that the overall divorce rate was 45%. Remember, according to your new revised study? Remember when we slept, we went from 56 to 50 to, I think actually it was 42, I think was the magic number we eventually wound up on, was 42%. And now you're saying, hey, for the college-educated couples, it's like 25%. So that would be a decrease of almost half, right? So yeah, because 25 is about half of 45. Right? So it's a decrease of almost half. So if both people are college educated, your divorce probability goes down by 50%. Wow. That sounds pretty good. Sounds a lot like his point. His point is looking pretty good. Did you know that the college educated people only get divorced about 25% of the time, but the non people get divorced like 42% of the time? Well, golly gee whiz, man, that sounds like college educated people get divorced a shit ton less. Sure does to me, man. That's what I'm hearing.
Hear from people like this who are trying to mislead you. But here's the thing. This is a cherry-picked demographic. It selects for the most economically privileged, educationally advantaged subset of the population and presents it as if it was a representative sample of the world. And it's...
No, it doesn't do any of those things, James. That was his entire argument. His argument was that college-educated women with more resources, women who don't get married because money, will get divorced less. That was his argument. And you're like, it's a cherry-picked statistic. No, it's not cherry-picked. That was exactly what he's trying to argue. And you're like, that's what the stats show. Yeah, they get divorced about half as often. But it was cherry picked. No, that was his argument. That was exactly what he was trying to argue. If you're college educated and have more money and more resources, you'll get divorced less often. Yeah, so the statistics he's quoting, and for that matter, the statistics you're quoting, are backing up that thesis. You're agreeing with his thesis as you appeal to incredulity. Fantastic.
Simply isn't. The majority of Americans don't have a 4-year college degree.
Sure.
So, Professor, why are you only talking about college-educated people in your
because that's his thesis.
The overwhelming majority of people in the United States are not college-educated?
Because that was his point. He's trying to say that if they're college-educated and have more resources and don't get married because money, that their divorce rate goes down. That is what his argument was. What do you mean? What are you talking about?
Calling 50% a myth is a tremendous disservice to reality.
It is a myth, according to you. First of all, you said 56%. So, yeah, calling it 50% is a disservice to reality. I suppose that's true in so much as you claimed 56%. So, yeah, 50% would be a disservice to reality because it changes your number. Your number was 56. I'm not letting you off the hook. That's what you claimed. And then your own study, your favorite study, this is the bestest study ever, don't you know, said, what was it, 42% was the magic number? Yeah, so your number was inflated by about a quarter? Yeah, so there's that. And then for the divorced people, it goes down by a relative rate of a half. Yeah, it's not going great for you over here.
Because about 42 to 45% of marriages end in divorce. That's every credible.
42 to 45. Well, that's a lot less than 56%, James. Didn't you say 56 and now you're saying 42 to 45? Yeah, what's the difference between 45 and 56, James? It's a difference of 11%. So that's what, it's a little bit less than a quarter. Because, yeah, it's a little bit less than a quarter. So that's what, 23% or something higher? Yeah, you were off by a little bit, James. Yeah.
Statistic out there cites that. What I was talking about in this clip from Diary of a CEO is the cumulative divorce rate likelihood, okay? Meaning the likelihood of people getting divorced who are getting married. Now, again, you have to combine.
Didn't you just say 42% though? Didn't you just say that just now? Was the overall divorce rate? You didn't say divorce rate for first-time marriages. You said it was the overall divorce rate. That's what you just said. I listened to you. You said 42 to 45% of all marriages. You didn't say of first-time marriages. Now you're going to talk about cumulative divorce rate, but the other statistic was cumulative. That's what you just said it was. What are you doing, man?
A lot of different cohorts into that study. But to say that it's a myth because the real number is between 42 to 45% of first marriages ending in divorce is a distinction without a difference.
No, it's a pretty big distinction, James. It is a massive distinction. 42 to 45 versus 56. Yeah, that's a difference of about 25% relative percent. That's you've inflated the number about 25%. So I would call that statistically significant, James. Yeah.
Whether it's 43% or 50%, the fundamental reality is the same.
No, even if it was 43 versus 50, it would not be the same. First of all, you said 56. I'm still not letting you off the hook. Second of all, the difference between 43 and 50, let's see. That's a difference of 7% off of 43%. So that would be roughly, what is that? I'm trying to do quick math in my head, which is always dangerous as a lawyer. It would be roughly about, what, 17 or 16%, something like that. So it's still not great. It's a little bit, yeah, there's a bit of a difference between those two numbers, ma'am.
Dissolution is extremely common. In fact, it is likely. The suggestion that people are better at marriage or making better choices now, whether it's because the misogyny that was inherently in the system previously, or whether it's because there have been changes in technology and society or our economy, it's just a red herring that's being used.
No, it's not a red herring. It's his thesis It's his thesis for why these things are true. He has noted the divorce rate is dropped, which you've agreed with, and he has presented a thesis for why he believes that's true. He believes it's due to more education. He believes it's due to women having more resources. He believes it's due to women choosing marriage for reasons other than money because they have resources of their own. That's his thesis for why he thinks that's happening. You have presented no thesis of why you think it's happening, incidentally. So you're just like, his thesis is offensive. His thesis is offensive. First of all, why is it offensive? Second of all, class is absolutely a thing. I'm pretty sure that money is a principal reason that people get divorced, James. I'm pretty sure that's pretty high on the list. So if money is less an issue, probably less divorce, I would imagine. Seems logical to me. But you've presented no counter argument. You've just simply said his argument is offensive. His argument is classist. Would you like to present an alternative theory for why you think the number's going down? No, you wouldn't like to present an alternative theory? Okay, moving on.
To support something that's a classist and specifically designed argument to obfuscate reality. The sociologist Andrew Cherlin at Johns Hopkins wrote extensively about how marriage has become a capstone rather than a cornerstone experience, something achieved after economic stability rather than something that's giving people a pathway to it. This means that the declining divorce rate coexists with the increasing family instability over.
I don't know how that would mean that. Maybe I'm not educated enough, but I do not understand how marriage is a capstone rather than a cornerstone, something that's achieved after economic stability rather than pathway to it. I don't understand how that would therefore lead to declining divorce rate but increasing family instability. I don't understand how those things link. I feel like I need some extra. I feel like I need some more steps in the middle. Could you flush out your work a little bit more? Could you demonstrate or make some more argument about why, if it's a capstone rather than a cornerstone, why that would increase family instability? Could you show the causality a little bit more? I'm going to need you to show your work a little bit more. I'm not seeing the connection. Could you show your work?
Overall, the declining divorce rate is not a story about us getting better at marriage. It's a story about who's actually getting married now.
Which arguably is a story about getting better at marriage. So if who's getting married changes, maybe that's a story about us getting better at it. So, okay.
The hard census data here is actually pretty solid. According to the current population survey 2023 ASEC supplement, there are approximately 133.1 million married adults age 15 plus in the United States, not counting 4.6 million who are legally separated. So that's 4.6 million people that are in marital limbo. They're legally married, but functionally they're not. Okay, so they don't show up in the divorce statistics at all. So the percentages we just talked about, that's 4.6 million people that don't show up in the divorce statistics, but are not happily married. They are separated, okay? So among single Americans, defined as separated, divorced, widowed, or never married, separated individuals make up approximately 3% of the single population in the United States. For same-sex couples,
Wait, no, that doesn't make sense. Oh, you're saying separated counts as single? Okay, that's a strange way to define single, but I guess all right.
it's even more striking. In 2019, 5 to 6% of same-sex couples were divorced, and an additional 2.1% were separated. The Bowling Green State University National Family Research data is particularly useful here because the share of ever married women, that means women who were ever married, who are currently separated or divorced, increased from less than 1% in 1900 to 20% in 20.
In 1900? What the fuck? What are you doing? What are you doing going all the way back to 1900? No fault divorce wasn't a thing until 1969. So, I'm not sure what we're doing going all the way back to 1900. Quite a lot of things have changed since 1900. A lot in multiple dimensions. So I'm not sure how helpful going all the way back to 1900 is for anything, but noted.
2022. That's 1 in 5 ever married women currently in a state of marital disruption. Here's where the data gets really grim for anyone who's trying to argue, like this guy is, that marriage is thriving somehow.
Wait a second, though. The share of ever married women who are separated or divorced increased to 20%. So from the woman's point of view, there's a 20% chance of failure. That sounds pretty good compared to that 56 number or the 42 number or even the 25 number. So according to you, because this includes divorce, it says so right here, separated or divorced is 20%. So from the woman's point of view, there's only a 20% chance of failure, even including separation. Not 56, not 50, not 40 to 45, not even 25, 20%. The numbers are just getting better and better with every passing moment. It's amazing.
Ever married women currently in a state of marital disruption. Here's where the data gets really grim for anyone who's trying to argue, like this guy is, that marriage is thriving somehow. The Tashira.
I mean, comparatively, immediately since it's well, he didn't necessarily say thriving. I don't remember him saying thriving. I remember him saying the rate has gone down. I don't remember him saying thriving. So straw man a little bit on top of everything else. Okay.
Shiro estimate. Psychologist Tai Tashiro is the author of a book called The Science of Happily Ever After, and he stated that of all people who get married, only 3 in 10 remain in healthy, happy marriages. Okay, think about that. If roughly 40 to 45% divorce by all available metrics, and only 30% are happily married, that leaves roughly 25 to 30% in marriages that are intact but not happy.
I mean, I have to question a little bit who this guy is. I mean, okay. I mean, at least you've cited us a guy, so you've cited a source. But I note that you didn't say like it's the gold standard or anything like you did earlier with those wonderful CDC or census or, you know, other studies where you're like, this is the gold standard of truth. Now we have this guy, whoever this guy is, saying, well, if you assume these numbers, then I guess, but where are we getting these numbers from? I'm not sure. I mean, we know where the 40 to 45% number is. We got that from studies, so we got that. As for the 30% who are happily married, I'm not sure on that one, but okay, noted.
But maybe you don't like his study. Let's look at some other ones. A national survey in 2023 of Americans found that although 86% of married couples report being happy they got married, 1 in 7 couples, 14%.
14% is a lot less than it was before. So it's dropped by half because the other guy said like 30%. So that's half as much. Okay.
Express unhappiness with their marriage. More than 1 in 10 Americans, that's 11%, admit to not liking their spouse as a person. 38% of couples report feeling obligated to stay married, and 19% describe their marriage as loveless. So that 38% obligated to stay number is a blockbuster. I said maybe 10, 20%. Turns out it's 38%. Add that to the undisputed 42 to 45%, and I think I was actually being nicer to marriage than the reality here. The National Opinion Research Center in 2014 did a study that revealed that marital happiness has been trending downward for a really long time. People are becoming less and less happy in their marriages. Look it up. Pew Research Center in 2023 found that
I like how he just says been trending downward, but he doesn't say what the trend is. He just says that I like that. He doesn't present any numbers. He just says it's trending downward. Look it up. I don't know. You're the one citing things. Maybe you could tell me.
Light majority of Americans, 55%, say that couples who are unhappy tend to stay in bad marriages for too long, compared with 43% who say that couples...
Also, incidentally, by the way, this does nothing to rebut his argument that as for college-educated people or people with more resources or things are happier in marriages, which was his entire thesis, or at least a major part of his thesis. He had two theses. He had two theses. One is that the divorce rate has been going down, and two, that college-educated women, women with more resources, are happier in marriages, and it doesn't lead to divorce as much. And now you're like, so you're rebutting an argument that he wasn't even really making, but that's okay.
Tend to get divorced too quickly. So think about that. 7 in 10 unmarried adults living with a partner, that's 72%, say couples stay in bad marriages for too long. And you're going to try to convince me that marriage, we're doing better at it? So,
well, I mean, yeah, we are doing better by the statistics that I mean, yeah, at least in the demographic he was talking about, which was his central argument, yes.
Let's add up all this math and use our argumentation skills and see where we end up. Now, remember, I said we're somewhere in the area of 66 to 76% when it comes to marriage not working out. Let's see what the data says. Start with the 42 to 45% of all marriages that end in formal divorce. Then add the separated but not divorced population we talked about, 4.6 million, roughly 3.3% of married adults who are technically still married but living apart because they're already separated. Then add in the unhappily married people we talked about in the prior research, using even the most conservative survey data of 14 to 19% of intact marriages self-reported unhappy. Let's combine those categories, 42 to...
Well, I still note that that's a lot less than the 56% you said. You said 56% for divorces, and oh no, it's 42 to 45. But it doesn't matter, I'm sure.
45% formally divorced, 3 to 4% separated without divorcing, 14 and 19 intact and self-reporting as unhappy or loveless. That means of the 55% of marriages that don't end in divorce, somewhere between 14 to 38%, depending on which metric you use, unhappy, loveless, or feeling obligated to stay, are not doing well. Okay? Using even the conservative numbers, the conservative end of those, 14% unhappy applied to the 55% who stay married, that's roughly another 7 to 8% of all marriages. So when you add formal divorces, roughly 43%, permanent separations, 3 to 4%, and add intact unhappy marriages, at a minimum 8 to 10% of all marriages.
I also question that 3% of formal separation number. I mean, I am readily admitting that I am not an expert in family law. As I said, I've tried to avoid it because it's just a pit of sadness. I can't deal with that much sadness. It's just a world of pain. Not for me. But I have a really hard time believing that 3% of marriages have actually gone through the process of filing formal legal separation agreements. I have a tough time believing that. I mean, maybe I'm just naive, but that just seems like a lot. So I don't know, man. I question that number, to be honest. I'm not sure about that one.
Only about 30 to 35% of marriages in the United States result in a lasting, happy union, which is what people signed up for when they got married. And that aligns almost exactly with the numbers that I was presenting here, Professor Argument.
Yeah, but the numbers you were presenting were different numbers. But you're like, it's all okay because other numbers add up to the same magic total. So it's totally cool that I was wrong on the constituents, right? I said 56% and it's really 42%, but it's totally okay because these other numbers get to my total of 70%. So I was right in the end. First of all, his argument was divorces have gone down. I don't remember him saying anything about any of these other categories. All I really remember him saying was divorces went down. And I also remember him saying that college-educated women and women with more resources tend to get divorced less. And so those claims seem to have been bolstered. And then you've said you've said that my own numbers are completely wrong, but it's okay. Other numbers mean that I'm somehow right in the end, even though I'm not really responding to him anymore. I also note for the record that this video is entitled World's Best Lawyer Responds to All of His Critics. All, by the way, being in all caps. He wrote the word all in all caps, but apparently all of his critics comprise one guy. So there's that. All right. Also, not for nothing, why does he have brass knuckles on his bookshelf? Is that even legal where he lives? Moving on.
Just in case you're worried that I'm pulling numbers out of my ass the way that the
You were a little
professor
bit
did,
worried, yeah.
take a look below and we will give you the citations. We will include those receipts. Now, Professor, I have to say, I may not be a professor of argumentation,
You're
but
definitely
your
not.
argument does not hold water whatsoever.
I don't know. It felt like it pretty much did to me. I mean, his argument was divorces has gone down and college-educated women and women with resources tend to do better. I don't know. Felt like his argument holds water, even using your own numbers and statistics. But okay, all right, whatever.
It's pandering, it's popular, it gets lots of likes and lots of comments and engagement, but it's not factually correct. It's
I don't know.
demonstrably false, and
I'm
it's
not
not
sure about
made in
that.
good faith because you cherry picked your statistics, which again,
He cherry picked his statistics because he was making a specific argument. He was trying to make a specific argument. So he found statistics that were relevant to his argument. That's how that would work. He was trying to make a specific argument, so he found the statistics that were relevant to his specific argument. So that's how that would work. I suppose you can say his argument is somehow bollocks because it doesn't matter or something, but I don't know. It seems to me like his argument is doing pretty well to my mind.
I hope you're not teaching your students to do, unless you want them to be partisan advocates like me, where we kind of make a good living doing that. So I wish
You're a partisan advocate? You're a partisan advocate? Oh, okay. I mean, all right. Noted, I guess.
you the best. Thank you so much for talking about me. I appreciate it. You're nobody till somebody hates you. I did comment on this video.
I don't know, incidentally, that he hated you, but I mean, okay.
That you are absolutely wrong and that you're
I don't know. He seems like he's right to me. Happy to discuss or debate with citations your number analysis are wrong. I don't know, man. I don't know. It seems like his central thesis is doing okay to me. Based on your own statistics, it seems like his central thesis is doing okay. So yeah, I'm not feeling it, man. Not seeing it.
statistics are wrong, and I'd be happy to debate you on this since you are a professor of argumentation and I argue for a living. It'd probably be really, really interesting. So I once again will welcome you to that debate. Come to New York City. I'm happy to come to LA. I'm there all the time to appear on things. Or we can just do it via Zoom and make it for an audience. We can even do it for charity. We can have people pledge for it and we can donate it to a charity we both support. I'm sure we have those kinds of things in common. So please take me up on this. I argue for a living. You teach people how to argue for a living. This could be a wonderful time, and I'd more than welcome the opportunity.
Well, that was exciting. Yeah. So,
I'm holding you in contempt of court.
sorry. So my overall analysis of Mr. Sexton, much to the contrary of his promise at the beginning, Mr. Sexton engaged in quite a bit of ad hominem. Also a little bit of straw man and some red herrings to boot. A lot of appeal to incredulity. Then there was like an appeal to credentials, which he himself doesn't have. That was nice. And then he showed statistics that showed his own claim to be false. He said 56%, but his own statistics don't agree with him. But he's like, it doesn't matter. It matters a little bit because you're only off by a relative factor of about 25%. So that's a bit of a problem. And then, but he's like, it's all okay because even though I was totally wrong on my divorce statistic, I'm right because these other studies say that people are unhappy and so marriages are failing or something. I don't know. But I don't even think the other guy was trying to say that marriage is necessarily, well, he was trying to say the divorce rate is down and that college educated women and women with more resources tend to get married for money less, and they seem to be getting divorced less because money is a major factor of divorce, and therefore because money is not as much a factor for these women, then they'll tend to get divorced less because money is less of a friction point. And they're also college educated, and college educated women do better when it comes to getting married, which your own statistics validated. By the tune of what? 50% relative? I think was what we wound up with, because college educated women get divorced at what, a 25% relative rate or 25% absolute rate? And so, or maybe it's 20% because your other statistic said 20%. So yeah, maybe it's something like 20% or 25%, as opposed to the 42%, or opposed to your fictitious 56%. So yeah, his own numbers seem to back his claim. Or your own numbers seem to back his claim. Divorces, in fact, are going down. And then, of course, you made up shit about no-fault divorce, which was particularly frustrating. It's like he said most states didn't come up with no-fault divorce until the 2000s. No, that's not true. Every single state had no-fault divorce by 1985, with the sole exception of New York, which hung out until 2010. They were the last ones, because of the huge Catholic presence, in case you're curious as to why. Catholics don't believe in divorce. So in case you're wondering why, it's because New York has a very high Catholic population. So it took them a lot longer to come up with no-fault divorce, to the tune of an extra 25 years. It took them, as opposed to the next closest competitor. So, but yeah, you're just making up shit about no-fault divorce. Because the other guy said, oh, this was a feature of the 70s and 80s. Yeah, it was. That's when the states passed it. 1969 was California. And then basically everyone else comes along in the 70s and 80s. That's when it happened. Yeah. So, I mean, that's just true. And New York was a holdout. Yeah, not so much. So, yeah. And so the guy is basically, his theory is plausible. He believes that the divorce rate is going down among college educated women, at least in part because money. And you say, well, that's classist. It's classist. It's like, well, I suppose, but money is a major factor of divorce. So yes, class might factor into this. Yeah, because money is a major factor of divorce. So there's that. But it's really offensive. So all that shit. And then he admits to being a partisan, which was hilarious at the end. So I enjoyed that. So yeah. He seems to be believing that he was able to successfully defeat this guy's argument, and nothing he says is true. And I'm like, I don't know, man. I don't know. Based on the very information you presented, seems to me like his argument is reasonably sound. Seems to me like he has some pretty solid points, and he even has some plausible conjecture as to why he thinks certain things are true. Why has the divorce rate gone down among people? Why is this true? And he's pointing to some things that seem plausible. More education, more money. Seems plausible. You've presented no counter argument, incidentally. You've presented no argument in the contrary as to why you think the divorce rate has gone down. What do you think it's due to? You note that fewer people are getting married, but that inherently wouldn't necessarily change the divorce rate unto itself. Right? The number of people getting married may or may not influence the divorce rate, but it has. Or you think people are being more choosy about who they get married to? They're having relationships other than marriage? Maybe, but then that just proves that, the divorce rate is less because people are choosing alternatives or what, I don't even know what we're doing over here. I just don't really understand the argument. I found his entire video to be condescending and belittling and insulting this guy It's like, can you believe this guy over here? Can you believe the shit he's saying? It's like, I can believe a lot of the shit he's saying. So it sounds, he must be doing it because of the clicks. He must be doing it, he must be doing it for all the boss babes. Yas Queen. He must be trying to go after the Yas Queen crowd and getting some clicks because it just sounds good. Okay, what do you think? What do you think it is? What do you think is happening? I mean, you are presumably a subject matter expert, if for no other reason than you talk to a lot of people who are getting divorced. You might be able to very intelligently answer this question just from your own experience. You're a divorce lawyer, right? You talk to a shit ton of people. So you know why people are getting divorced, and you probably know why people aren't getting divorced. Because I imagine not everyone who comes to you necessarily winds up getting divorced. Maybe some of them don't get divorced. Right? Or you'd have your ear to the ground on this. Maybe you can intelligently comment as to what you think is going on. Based on the 20 years experience I have talking to couples, here's what I think is going on. Or you could quote some statistics, anything. But you didn't present an alternative theory. You could even say, I think this guy is full of shit because I'm a divorce lawyer. I talk to people all the time. It's been my job. I talk to couples in distress for marriages. I have my ear to the ground. And not only my own clients, but I hang out with the cool kids at the, divorce lawyers conventions and shit. And so here's what I think is going on from my experience. But no, not so much. Not even with that. So yeah, all that good shit. So good things and all that. So I'm still with the first guy. I'm with the professor of argumentation. Yeah, I think his argument is better sourced, including from your own statistics, and better and plausible, and presents an interesting explanation that could very well be true. And he presented no alternative, but just exposed him to, can you believe this shit? He must be saying it for the clicks thing, but not provide any alternative rationale. So not so much. So there's all that. So I guess I'll leave it at that. I was not very impressed with Mr. Sexton on this occasion. I've watched a lot of other videos of his. I've watched a lot of his appearances on podcasts. I find him overall to be an intelligent person who has a lot of intelligent things to say and a lot of experience that backs his claims, from what he's exposed to. He has a lot of information that seems valuable. But on this particular occasion, I felt like he fell very short. So there's all that. Anyways, I'm going to sign off for now. I hope you've enjoyed this light stream video. I hope you've enjoyed this thing. And, I'll go ahead and sign off for now. So until later, my friends, I hope all is well. Cheers for now, my friends, and goodbye.